Out of all of Disney's theme parks around the world, only one has ever permanently closed. River Country was Disney's first water park, an old-fashioned swimming hole located next to Fort Wilderness at Walt Disney World. A successful addition to the resort during Disney World's early years, but perhaps more well known for the nearly 2 decades it sat decaying on the shores of Bay Lake, an icon of Disney's abandoned attractions. So in this video, let's take a look at the history of River Country, its life, its closure, the years it was left abandoned, and Disney's newest plans to replace it. While nowadays, Disney World is a theme park destination through and through, in the early 70s, the resort positioned itself more as an all-purpose vacation destination. Disney's tagline throughout the 70s was the Vacation Kingdom of the World, and it provided a host of recreational activities alongside its only standard theme park, Magic Kingdom. Outside of a trip to the park, guests could also go sailing, swimming, fishing, water skiing, or play on one of 2 golf courses. The resort was also home to 2 hotels, the Contemporary and the Polynesian, and the outdoorsy Fort Wilderness campground, with Disney set to expand in the coming years, adding the Persian, Asian, and Venetian resorts. However, these expansions to Disney World were cancelled shortly after being announced, due to the economic downturn caused by the 1973 oil crisis. And as the country began to recover, Disney would look towards a different, cheaper option to add more to do at their emerging resort in Central Florida. The existing Fort Wilderness campground was by far the cheapest place to stay at Disney World, and boasted a 750-acre forest with trails, cabins, and campsites for guests who either didn't want to or couldn't afford to stay at the expensive hotel rooms at the Polynesian and the Contemporary. Fort Wilderness was the perfect low-cost location for Disney to work on expanding their resort, and so the mid-70s saw a number of new attractions opening throughout the campgrounds, including a railroad, a horse riding ranch, and in June 1976, Disney World's second park, a small water park sat on the south shore of Bay Lake named Disney's River Country. As part of the Fort Wilderness expansion, River Country would maintain the same theme as the rest of the area, and would be a rustic, old-fashioned swimming hole. Old-fashioned swimming hole being the exact words used to describe the water park nearly every single time it's brought up by Disney.
It's a newfangled version of the old swimming hole.
River Country is a good old-fashioned swimming hole.
River Country is a newfangled version of the old swimming hole.
Huck Finn's dream come true of an old swimming hole.
Okay, so there's like River Country, which is this excellent old-fashioned swimming hole.
You know, kind of like where Huckleberry Finn used to hang out.
Featuring a great beach and a refreshing old-fashioned swimming spot.
Water parks are typically a lot smaller than standard theme parks, because you expect your guests to stay in one place for the majority of the day and not do much walking. But even so, River Country was a much smaller park than Disney's later water parks, Typhoon Lagoon and Blizzard Beach, with most of its attractions built around just 2 swimming pools. Beyond the park's entrance and its changing rooms and locker rental areas was the first of these, the Upstream Plunge Pool, a kidney bean-shaped swimming pool with a deep end accommodating the iconic slippery slide falls. Twin water slides built into themed rockwork that hung over the pool, ending with a freefall drop into the water. Other than the slides, Upstream Plunge was a pretty standard pool, but what wasn't standard about River Country was the park's main pool, usually referred to as Bay Cove. The park's much larger half-acre pool, an artificially made sand-bottom lake. Whilst Upstream Plunge was a chlorinated pool, to keep with the theme of an old-fashioned swimming hole, Bay Cove was made with fresh water. While it may look like River Country's main pool was made by filling it with water from neighbouring Bay Lake, simply allowing guests to swim in Bay Lake's murky, untreated water would be too dangerous, even for the 70s. And so Bay Cove and Bay Lake were separated by a barrier just beyond the reach of guests, and the water level of River Country was actually higher than that of Bay Lake, to stop any untreated water from getting in, with the park just being designed to look like it was connected to the lake, instead of actually being so. Although, funnily enough, Bay Cove actually did use water from Bay Lake, it was just pumped in through a filtration system to create a constant supply of fresh water to the pool. The system used to fill Bay Cove allowed it to maintain a more natural look, while still being safe for swimming. In and around the cove were most of River Country's other attractions. In the centre of the pool, there were 3 small attractions grouped together. First was a boom swing, one where you swing out over the water holding a wooden bar, then a tire swing, and a cable ride, similar to the one that exists nowadays at Blizzard Beach. And the park's 3 main water slides all emptied into Bay Cove. The first of these was the Whitewater Rapids, a 100-metre long tube ride down a series of twisting rapids, like a smaller version of Blizzard Beach's Teamboat Springs. The remaining 2 were a pair of twin water slides called Whoop and Holler Hollow. The cove also had a shallow area at one end called Kiddie Cove, which contained various kid slides, and 2 bridges to allow guests to cross back and forth between the main slides and the rest of the park. The one closer inland was the Barrel Bridge, a similar design to the one at Tom Sawyer Island, and the other was the larger Bay Bridge at the edge of the park, looking out onto Bay Lake and Magic Kingdom. Aside from that, River Country also had a small splash zone designed for younger children named Indian Springs, and, unusual for a water park, a bridged walking area called the Cypress Point Nature Trail, such an often forgotten area of River Country that it's rarely pictured in photos of the park. Oh, and also, Goofy was the mascot for this park, and he was everywhere. Not just in the park logo, but every time I go and look up new pictures of this place, I find yet more photographs of Goofy. Like, here he is, and here he is again. Looks like he's made a friend in this one. Whoa, I'd be careful there, Goofy. I don't think that many people can fit on that tire. Goofy, what are you doing? Some of these he's just hovering in the background, watching people plummet into the depths of the dark River Country water. Oh cool, I wonder who wrote this article. Oh, this one's kind of cute. Wait, is that Pluto? And as you can see, they didn't just send Goofy out to take photographs, but they actually used to send him down the slides and into the pools. And a full fur character going on rides at Disney is something I've actually never seen happen before. I know it does happen, because in the 2000s they always used to do that one promotional shot of a character riding the Barnstormer, which naturally, that was Goofy too, but I've never seen it happen in person. And I've never heard of anybody seeing it happen either. But seeing that there are home videos on YouTube of people just going down slides at River Country with Goofy, I guess this just used to be a regular occurrence. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you went on a ride with Goofy, please let me know. River Country continued life into the 70s as Disney World's second place to go. It even had its own theme song at one point. A song that's been in my head for the last 2 weeks, but it was never intended to be a big draw at the resort. River Country was always just a small extra, an addition to Fort Wilderness for campers to spend an afternoon in. That also meant that ticket prices to River Country were very low throughout its lifespan, costing $4.75 in 1976, or about $25 today. Much cheaper than anything available on Disney property nowadays. But despite its small, relatively inconsequential impact at Walt Disney World, or perhaps because of it, River Country enjoyed more than 2 decades of seasonal operation as the resort grew into the giant it is today. But unfortunately for River Country, as the 21st century began, things were about to change for the small water park. Unlike Disney's water parks today, River Country only operated seasonally, in the warmer months from April to the end of October. And when the park closed for the season on November 2nd, 2001, the expectation was that it would reopen to guests in spring 2002. However, by the coming April, the Orlando Sentinel reported that Disney had actually completely closed River Country and may not reopen it, adding that a spokesperson from Disney said it may open if there's enough guest demand, but suggesting that otherwise, Disney had no intention of reopening the water park. The 2002 summer season came and went without a single day of operation for River Country. Then the 2003 season came along, which also included my first ever trip to Disney World. But I didn't go to River Country, and neither did anyone else, as the park remained closed for another year. By 2004, the park was now 3 years into its temporary closure, with no sign of a reopening date. Until finally, in 2005, Disney officially announced that River Country was now closed permanently. As for the reasons why the park closed, I'll cover that towards the end of the video, but that's definitely not where the story ends. Because while its operating years were never particularly notable, River Country is much more famous now for what happened after it closed. It had taken Disney 4 years to finally admit that the water park had closed for good, and in those 4 years, the park had simply sat vacant on Bay Lake. But with the closure being finalised now, maybe Disney would go ahead with demolishing River Country and replacing it with something else. I mean, they definitely weren't going to let it sit there for years on end. Disney let it sit there for years on end. Rather than being demolished, River Country was just abandoned. I've made the point before in several videos already that Disney World has so much space available, when something closes, there's not much of a need for it to be removed. Demolition is, after all, expensive, and it's often far easier and cheaper to just leave everything where it is. Make the attraction disappear from maps and hide it from view until you can come up with a good reason to use the site. And this is exactly what happened with River Country. A simple sign was put up in front of the park, and a large green fence was built around its perimeter, signifying it was closed and off limits. But as it would turn out, that fence wouldn't provide enough protection against Disney World's urban explorers. It's been a good few months since I was last talking about urban explorers on this channel, but if you've seen my video on the history of Disney World urban exploring, you'll know all about the groups of urban explorers breaking into various abandoned and off-limits sites across the resort, and River Country being not just a single ride, but an entire abandoned Disney theme park left to rot on the shores of a Florida lake, and one that was now tucked away in a secluded area of Fort Wilderness made it the #1 target for urban exploration. Before long, images started emerging online of the abandoned River Country, decaying as nature takes hold once again. Both pools still had water, but without the constant maintenance required of a water park, the once blue upstream plunge pool had now turned a deep green, and Bay Cove now much more closely resembled Bay Lake, with a layer of algae forming and plants growing along its banks. The slides were now dried out and cracked, the rockwork falling apart, and fallen branches littering the whitewater rapids. The 2 bridges and the swings that sat in Bay Cove remained untouched, but were now rotting away due to neglect. Strangely enough, visitors to River Country noticed that in the years following the park's closure, Disney hadn't cut the power, and the lights still came on, presumably as a security measure. But even weirder than that was that the River Country music could still be heard throughout the park. More and more photos started surfacing online of the park in a progressing state of decay, and beginning sometime around 2011, with the advent of the new Disney Urbex culture emerging on YouTube, we began to get full videos of visits to River Country, still with signage and theming left up in the park maps available, and towel return boxes now empty. The nature trail now truly a nature trail, as it had become overgrown, and the whole place just becoming the quintessential abandoned theme park. Long meandering walkthroughs were published of River Country throughout the course of the late 2010s by various Disney and more general urban exploring focused YouTube channels. River Country became a fascination of many Disney and non-Disney fans alike, because of the creepy nature of a once loved water park now frozen in time. Even those who didn't dare trespass could still see the remains of River Country from points in Bay Lake, and arguably the place became more famous as the iconic, creepy, abandoned location than it ever had been as a functioning water park. Even the existence of River Country became a cool trivia piece. Did you know Disney had an abandoned water park? And many were enthralled with watching its decay. Surely though, Disney would have to eventually do something about this place. After all, as mentioned in my video on urban exploring, there was now an infestation of people breaking into all sorts of abandoned places across the resort, and the notoriety of River Country drew many unwanted visitors. The park's proximity to still open areas of Fort Wilderness, like Mickey's Backyard Barbecue, also made it all the more easy for individuals to sneak over to River Country to catch a glimpse beyond the fence. By the late 2010s, Disney started showing signs that they did still care about the park. In 2016, the upstream plunge pool was drained and filled in with cement, and in 2018, a full 17 years after it was first closed, Disney finally demolished River Country, as it announced a brand new project. River Country wasn't directly demolished because of the urban explorers though. Instead, Disney announced Reflections, a Disney Lakeside Lodge, a new Disney Vacation Club timeshare hotel to be built on the shore of Bay Lake. This was to be a modern apartment building style hotel where Bay Cove had been. The hotel's theming was minimal, but there were plans to theme rooms to various Disney wilderness style movies, like Bambi, Brother Bear, The Fox and the Hound, and Pocahontas. And the hotel was slated to feature a lakeside restaurant with characters from The Princess and the Frog. As River Country was demolished, the ground was flattened, and construction crews were brought in to begin building. The moment was kind of bittersweet. In a way, it was good to see River Country finally being dealt with, but over the past 17 years, it had also built up a new legacy of a sort, as one of the most legendary abandoned sites in theme park history, and it was sad to see the final remnants of the park go. But still, many were hopeful for River Country's replacement. Unfortunately though, it would never be so simple for the River Country story. Construction never came. Plans to begin building Reflections coincided with 2020, and well, you know, Disney World wasn't really doing much in 2020. And so amid a difficult year for the Disney parks, construction equipment was removed from the site, and plans were seemingly paused. Finally, in 2022, 4 years after Reflections was first shown to the public, and 21 years after the site was first vacated by River Country, some sources started reporting that Reflections had been cancelled to make way for a separate DVC project at the Polynesian Resort instead. Although it's worth mentioning that the cancellation has never been made official, and construction has seemingly been indefinitely paused. Since then, there have been various rumours flying around about the potential for the project to start up again, or for some other version of the project to start work. If you read about River Country on Wikipedia, you may have read that as of this year, Disney are planning to build a DVC tower there, but they provide no source for this, and I think this is just whoever edited the page getting confused with the tower being built at the Polynesian. In June of this year, it was reported that Disney had filed for an extension on a permit relating to, but not directly for, the Reflections Hotel. So they are still trying to keep their options open. But for now, the land that once held the old-fashioned swimming hole that was River Country sits empty. So I'm sure you're still wondering, why did River Country close? Disney never gave an official reason other than saying it might reopen with enough guest demand. But there is quite a bit more to the story than that. In August 1980, an 11-year-old boy died after contracting an amoebic infection of the brain from swimming in River Country's Bay Cove. The fact that Bay Cove was a freshwater lake and not a chlorinated pool meant that, like other freshwater lakes in Florida, in warm weather it was susceptible to this amoeba that, if it infected you, would cause almost certain death. And many years later, with Disney fans searching for reasons for the park's closure, the story of River Country's brain-eating amoeba spread, that the water would kill you if you swam in it, and so the park was quietly closed and abandoned, too dangerous to be demolished. But of course, that was a major exaggeration. River Country closed in 2001, 21 years after this incident. Disney can be pretty slow with things, but they definitely wouldn't be that slow with an emergency closure of a water park. And this was the only occurrence of such an incident at River Country. The amoeba is a problem that can happen very rarely in any fresh lake during hot weather, not a problem specific to the park. The tale of a deadly parasite lurking at River Country added to the mystery of the abandoned site when it was discussed online, but it didn't hold any actual weight. So what was the real reason why River Country closed? Well, it all comes back to then Disney CEO Michael Eisner. No, it doesn't. Not this time, at least. Although there's always a chance. In 1989, Disney World opened Typhoon Lagoon, its second water park. And in 1995, a third water park, Blizzard Beach, also opened at the resort. Both of these parks were much bigger than River Country, more modern than River Country, and very quickly became more popular than River Country. And most importantly for Disney, they also had more expensive tickets than River Country. And as a result, River Country's attendance steadily declined throughout the 90s. Lastly, in late 2001, tourism across the United States took a drastic downturn, as you might expect, and Walt Disney World faced a large drop in attendance and decline in revenue, and were looking at ways to cut costs. River Country was originally supposed to survive. In the late 90s, a new mascot was even drawn up to go alongside the two gator mascots from Typhoon Lagoon and Blizzard Beach. But now with the need to cut back, Disney couldn't justify having 3 water parks at their resort, and so this was the most likely reason the park was closed. With 2018's final demolition of the park, River Country and its long legacy of life, death, and abandonment disappeared from Walt Disney World. But there still is one remnant of the park left behind. The water tower that once marked the entrance to River Country was removed in 2009 to be redecorated, and used as the centerpiece of the slide at the Meadows swimming pool in Fort Wilderness. I was a bit reluctant to make a video about River Country, as this is a topic that's already been covered all over the place by multiple different people. But I figured there was still a lot to say about the park that hadn't necessarily been touched by others, so I thought it was worth me giving it a go. If you want to know more about the urban exploring aspect of River Country and many of Disney World's other abandoned sites, check out my video on the history of Disney World urban exploring on my channel. I hope you enjoyed my look back at River Country, Disney's abandoned water park. Let me know your thoughts about River Country and what your hopes are for the future of the site. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or maybe checking out some of the other videos on my channel. If there's anything else you'd like me to cover on the channel, please let me know, and as always, I'll see you next time.